A nurse sprints through Boston, late for her shift, unaware a deadly threat looms nearby. In one heart-stopping moment, her courage will change lives forever, sparking a thrilling, transformative journey. Welcome to Life Bond Tales. Here you will get heartwarming tales of real-life stories. Sarah Ellis weaved through the bustling streets of Boston, her sneakers slapping against the cobblestones of Beacon Hill as the October sun painted the city in hues of gold and amber. At 28, she was a nurse whose life revolved around the sterile halls of Massachusetts General Hospital, where she poured her heart into caring for patients who often forgot her name, but never her kindness. Her dark hair was swept into a messy bun, strands escaping from her hurried morning routine, and her navy scrub top bore faint wrinkles from being yanked from a laundry basket still warm from the dryer. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a call from her mother, Clara, whose voice would no doubt carry the familiar weight of worry. Bills for electricity and rent were overdue again, piling up in their cramped South End apartment. Sarah's chest tightened as she dodged a jogger pushing a stroller, her mind replaying Clara's sacrifices, years spent scrubbing floors as a cleaner to keep Sarah in nursing school after her father walked out when she was 9. That abandonment had left a quiet ache in Sarah's heart, one she buried beneath her drive to help others, dreaming of a community clinic where people like her mother could walk in without fear of crushing debt. But dreams were luxuries, and right now Sarah was 15 minutes late for her shift, her breath puffing in the chilly air as she sprinted past brownstones and coffee carts, muttering apologies to a man whose newspaper she nearly knocked over. Across town, in a cozy cafe tucked between skyscrapers, Elena Voss sat with 2 colleagues, their laptops glowing with spreadsheets and patent drafts for an AI that could predict diseases with uncanny precision. At 42, Elena was a tech CEO whose sharp intellect and tailored blazer hid the scars of a childhood spent in poverty, her rise to power fueled by relentless ambition and a knack for outsmarting rivals. The cafe's brick walls glowed under Edison bulbs, and the aroma of fresh espresso mingled with soft jazz, creating a warmth that contrasted with the high-stakes conversation at her table. Her colleagues, a data scientist and a legal advisor, leaned in, their voices low as they discussed a deal that could reshape medical diagnostics or provoke the wrath of competitors who wanted her innovation buried. Elena's hazel eyes scanned the room, a habit born from years of navigating threats in a cutthroat industry, but she didn't notice the man in the grey hoodie lingering outside, his posture too rigid for the casual flow of pedestrians. Sarah, meanwhile, clutched her backpack tighter, her legs burning as she crossed Charles Street, her mind split between guilt for not answering her mother's call and the mental checklist of patients awaiting her. Mr. Carter in 304 needed his IV changed, and Mrs. Lopez in pediatrics always smiled when Sarah brought her an extra blanket. Her life was a treadmill of 12-hour shifts, vending machine dinners, and the constant math of stretching her paycheck to cover rent and her mother's medications. She'd once hoped to travel, maybe see Paris or the Grand Canyon, but those dreams had faded under the weight of responsibility, leaving her with only the flicker of her clinic idea, a beacon she clung to in her rare quiet moments. As she neared the hospital, the familiar red brick facade in sight, her eyes caught a flicker of movement across the street at the cafe. The man in the hoodie stood unnaturally still, his hands fidgeting near his jacket's zipper, his gaze fixed on Elena's table with an intensity that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Her nurse's intuition, honed from years of spotting subtle signs in patients, labored breathing, a flicker of pain, kicked in, and her steps slowed. His posture screamed purpose, not the aimless loitering of a passerby, and when his hand dipped inside his jacket, a glint of metal caught the sunlight. Sarah's heart thudded, not from her rush but from a primal sense of danger, her body tensing as if it knew something her mind hadn't yet processed. She was just a nurse late for work, invisible in the city's morning chaos, but in that fleeting moment as her eyes locked on the stranger's intent, Sarah stood on the edge of a choice that would rewrite her life forever. Sarah's heart pounded as she stood frozen on the corner of Charles Street, the glint of metal in the hooded man's hand searing into her vision like a warning flare. The morning crowd surged around her, oblivious, Businessmen tapping phones, a barista calling out orders, taxis honking in the Boston bustle. But Sarah's world narrowed to the man across the street, his movements deliberate as he stepped off the curb toward the cafe where Elena Voss sat. Her breath caught sharp and cold as she saw him pull a handgun from his jacket, his grip steady, eyes locked on Elena's unaware silhouette framed by the cafe's window. Sarah's backpack slipped from her shoulder, hitting the pavement. With a dull thud, her phone still buzzing with her mother's unanswered call, but none of that mattered now. Instinct took over, the same reflex that had her running toward a crashing patient before a doctor could call a code. She didn't think about the danger, the odds, or the life she'd built on quiet sacrifices. She only saw a woman in peril, a stranger whose life hung on a moment. Her legs moved before her mind could catch up, propelling her across the street in a desperate sprint, weaving through startled pedestrians who yelped as she brushed past. The man raised the gun, his stance widening, and Elena, mid-sentence with... Her colleagues glanced up, her face paling as she registered the barrel aimed at her chest. Time slowed, the world muffling into a dull roar, horns, shouts, the clatter of a dropped coffee cup as Sarah's body acted on its own. She lunged, her arms outstretched, throwing herself between Eleanor and the gun just as the shooter's finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot cracked, a deafening snap that shattered the morning's rhythm, and pain exploded in Sarah's chest, a white-hot jolt that stole her breath and sent her crashing backward into the cafe's outdoor table. The table flipped, dishes shattering in a cascade of porcelain, and Elena's colleagues screamed, one diving for cover, the other frozen in shock. Sarah hit the pavement hard, her vision swimming, blood blooming warm and wet across her scrub top, soaking through to her skin. She didn't scream, didn't have the air for it, only gasped as the world tilted, faces blurring above her. Eleanor scrambled to her side, her polished composure gone, hands shaking as she pressed them against Sarah's chest, blood seeping through her fingers. "Stay with me," Elena urged, her voice raw, urgent as she grabbed a napkin from the wreckage to stem the flow. "You're going to be okay, just hold on." Sarah's eyes fluttered, her lips parting to form words she couldn't voice, her body trembling as pain radiated with every shallow breath. Around them, chaos erupted. Bystanders screamed, some running, others pulling out phones to record or call for help. The shooter turned to flee, his hoodie slipping to reveal a glimpse of dark hair, but Boston's streets fought back. A bike, courier, all sinew and adrenaline, barreled into him, tackling him to the ground with a grunt while a burly construction worker in a neon vest kicked the gun away, its metal skittering across the asphalt. "Don't move!" the worker bellowed, pinning the man as sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Elena ignored the commotion, her focus locked on Sarah, whose face was paling, her breaths uneven. "You saved me," Elena whispered, her voice breaking as she pressed harder against the wound, her designer watch now slick with blood. "Why did you... why?" Sarah's gaze met hers, unfocused but fierce, and she managed a faint rasp. "Had to." The words cost her, pain flaring as her chest heaved, but they carried a conviction that silenced Elena's questions. Paramedics arrived in a blur of red lights and shouted commands, pushing through the crowd to kneel beside Sarah. "Female, late 20s, gunshot wound to the chest," one barked, checking her pulse as another cut away her scrub top to reveal the entry, wound just below her collarbone. They worked fast, applying pressure, sliding a stretcher beneath her, their hands steady despite the chaos. Eleanor stood, her hands bloodied, her tailored blazer ruined, but she didn't care. She climbed into the ambulance after Sarah, ignoring her colleagues' pleas to stay safe. "I'm not leaving her," she snapped, her voice carrying a steel that brooked no argument. The ambulance doors slammed shut, the siren piercing the air as it sped toward the hospital, Sarah's consciousness fading in and out, her hand limp in Elena's grip. In that moment, as the city blurred past the windows, two women, one a nurse who'd given everything, the other a titan who'd never known such sacrifice, were bound by a single act of courage that would change them both forever. The ambulance screeched to a halt at Massachusetts General Hospital's emergency entrance, its siren cutting off as paramedics flung open the doors and wheeled Sarah inside, her stretcher rattling over the threshold. Eleanor Voss followed close behind, her blood-streaked blazer a stark contrast to the sterile white of the trauma bay. Her eyes fixed on Sarah's pale face as doctors swarmed, shouting vitals: pulse weak, BP 90/60, chest wound, possible hemothorax. Sarah's world was a haze of pain and flickering lights, her chest burning with each shallow breath. The bullet lodged deep near her collarbone, threatening to steal what little strength she had left. Nurses hooked her to monitors, their hands swift as they inserted IV lines and called for O-negative blood, while a trauma surgeon barked orders to prep the OR. Eleanor stood frozen in the hallway, her hands still trembling with Sarah's blood, watching through the glass as the team fought to stabilize the woman who'd taken a bullet meant for her. Her mind churned with guilt. Her AI patent had enemies, rivals who'd rather see her dead than let her tech disrupt their profits, and now a stranger was paying the price. She ignored her phone buzzing with calls from her security team, her colleagues and reporters already sniffing out the story. All she could hear was the echo of Sarah's faint "had to" from the cafe pavement. Inside the trauma bay, Sarah's consciousness flickered, fragments of memory surfacing through the fog. Her mother's tired smile after a long cleaning shift, the way she'd slip an extra $1 into Sarah's lunch bag as a kid. The night Sarah graduated nursing school and Clara wept with pride, whispering, "You're my hero." Sarah had always been the one to fix things, bandaging neighbors' kids, staying late to comfort a scared patient. But now she was the one broken, tubes snaking from her arms, her heartbeat erratic on the monitor. The surgeon's voice cut through, "She's crashing, get the crash cart." As Sarah's vitals plummeted, her body slipping into shock. Eleanor, still outside, pressed a hand to the glass, her breath catching as she saw the defibrillator paddles. Charge. The team's urgency a silent scream that this might be the end. But Sarah's heart fought back, the monitor beeping steadily after a tense moment, and the team rushed her to surgery, leaving Elena alone in the hallway, her tailored shoes squeaking on the linoleum. She sank into a plastic chair, ignoring her security chief's plea to leave for her own safety. She wasn't going anywhere until she knew Sarah would live. Hours crawled by, each minute heavy with the weight of what had happened. Eleanor's mind drifted to her own past. Growing up in a Chicago tenement, her mother working double shifts as a seamstress, teaching her that power came from grit, not luck. She'd built her empire on that lesson, but today Sarah's selflessness had cracked something open in her, a reminder of what it meant to act without calculating the cost. A nurse approached, her scrubs crisp, her voice gentle. "You're with the gunshot victim. Her name's Sarah Ellis, registered nurse here. We found her ID." Elena nodded, the name anchoring her guilt. Sarah wasn't just a stranger, but someone who'd chosen to save her, a woman with a life, a story, dreams. The nurse added, "She's in surgery now, it's touch and go, but she's a fighter." Elena clung to those words, her fingers tightening around the chair's armrest as she waited, refusing coffee or a change of clothes, her bloodied blazer a badge of the debt she owed. In the OR, surgeons worked with precision, extracting the bullet that had narrowly missed Sarah's heart, but torn through muscle and bone, causing significant blood loss. They stabilized her, but her recovery would be a long road, her body fragile from the trauma. As the surgery ended, the lead surgeon stepped out, his face weary but calm, and told Elena, "She made it through, but she's not out of the woods. She'll be in the ICU, intubated for at least a day." Elena's knees weakened, relief flooding her as she whispered a thank you, not to the surgeon but to whatever force had kept Sarah alive. She insisted on seeing her, following a nurse, to the ICU where Sarah lay, pale and still, surrounded by beeping machines and tubes that seemed to tether her to life itself. Elena stood by the bed, her heart twisting at the sight of Sarah's bandaged chest. Her dark hair splayed across the pillow, her face peaceful yet fragile. She reached out, hesitating, then gently touched Sarah's hand, whispering, "I don't know why you did it, but I'll make sure it wasn't for nothing." The promise felt heavy, a vow born from guilt and awe, as Elena realized this moment wasn't just about survival, it was the start of something bigger, a debt she could never fully repay, but would spend her life trying to honor. Sarah Ellis stirred in the ICU, her eyelids fluttering open to a world of antiseptic sharpness and muted beeps, the pain in her chest a dull roar that anchored her to consciousness. It was nearly 24 hours since the shooting, and the sterile glow of the hospital room felt alien. Its white walls and blinking monitors, a far cry from the chaotic cafe where she'd thrown herself into danger. Her body ached, the bandage on her chest tight and heavy, IV lines tugging at her arm as she tried to shift, wincing at the sharp stab that followed. She blinked, disoriented, her throat dry as sandpaper, and then she saw her, a woman in a grey cashmere sweater, her hazel eyes intense yet soft, sitting in a chair beside the bed. Helena Voss leaned forward, her face etched with relief and something deeper, a gratitude that seemed to weigh down her usually poised frame. "Sarah, you're awake," Helena said, her voice low but warm, like a lifeline pulling Sarah from the fog. Sarah's brow furrowed, the name Voss sparking a vague recognition, but her mind was a jumble of fragmented images: the man's gun, the cafe's shattering glass, the searing pain. "You're Helena Voss," Sarah rasped, her voice weak, each word a struggle. Helena nodded, leaning closer. "You saved my life yesterday. You took a bullet meant for me." The words hit Sarah like a slow wave, her breath catching as the memory snapped into focus. The hooded man, her desperate sprint, the gunshot's thunder. Her hand trembled, instinctively touching the bandage, and she whispered, "I got shot." Elena's eyes softened, but her voice held steady. "You did. And you survived. Because of you, I'm here." Sarah's gaze drifted to the ceiling, her mind reeling. She'd acted on instinct, not heroism, yet now she was tethered to machines, her life upended. Helena reached into her bag, pulling out a sleek black envelope sealed with a gold clasp, and placed it on the bedside table beside a plastic water cup. "This is for you," she said, her tone firm but gentle. "A condo on Beacon Street, fully furnished, and a trust fund. $15 million. It's not charity, Sarah. It's what you deserve for what you did." Sarah's eyes widened, her heart stuttering as she stared at the envelope, its weight seeming to press against her already fragile chest. "No," she murmured, shaking, her head, the motion sending a jolt of pain through her. "I can't. I don't—" Her voice faltered, the idea of such wealth clashing with the life she knew. Nights of ramen dinners, dodging debt collectors, saving every penny for her mother's prescriptions. Eleanor's expression didn't waver. "You stepped in front of a gun for a stranger. You earned this, Sarah, a chance to live without worry." Before Sarah could protest further, the door opened and her mother, Clara, burst in, her graying hair disheveled from a rushed flight from their hometown. "Sarah, oh my girl," Clara cried, her voice thick with tears as she rushed to the bed, careful not to jostle the tubes. Sarah's eyes stung, her mother's familiar scent of lavender soap grounding her as they embraced, Clara's hands trembling. As she cupped Sarah's face, "You're alive, thank God," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. She turned to Helena, recognition dawning. "You're the one she saved, Ms. Voss." Eleanor nodded, stepping back to give them space. "Your daughter's a hero, Miss Ellis." Clara's eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to Sarah, confusion mixing with awe. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice shaking. Eleanor explained, her words measured. The condo, the money, a future free of the struggles Clara and Sarah had endured together. Sarah covered her face, tears slipping through her fingers. The weight of it all too much. Yesterday she was a nurse running late. Today she was a headline, a stranger's savior, and now, impossibly, a millionaire. "I was just doing what felt right," she said, her voice barely audible. Helena knelt beside her, her gaze unwavering. "That's why it matters. You didn't hesitate, Sarah. Most would have looked away." Clara squeezed Sarah's hand, her own tears falling. "You've always been like this, always putting others first, but this—" She gestured to the envelope, her voice catching. "This is too much." Sarah shook her head, her chest tight with emotion, not just from the pain, but from the surreal shift in her reality. Outside, she could hear the distant hum of reporters, their cameras waiting like vultures. Her name already splashed across news feeds as Boston's brave nurse. She wasn't ready for that, for the world's eyes, for the envelope that promised a life she'd never imagined. Helena stood, sensing Sarah's overwhelm, and spoke softly. "You don't have to decide anything now, just rest. But know this, you're not alone anymore." She moved toward the door, pausing to look back. "I'll be here, Sarah, whenever you're ready." As the door clicked shut, Sarah stared at the envelope, its gold clasp glinting in the dim light, a symbol of a door she hadn't yet dared to open. Clara sat beside her, silent, her hand warm in Sarah's, and for the first time in years Sarah felt the weight of being seen, not just by her mother, but by a world that was beginning to rewrite her story. 3 weeks after the shooting, Sarah Ellis stepped out of Massachusetts General Hospital into a world that no longer felt like hers, the crisp Boston air stinging her still-healing chest as she clutched her discharge papers. The condo key in her pocket felt heavy, alien, a reminder of the black envelope. She'd finally opened, revealing Eleanor Voss's life-altering gift. A Beacon Street penthouse and $15 million, now hers beyond dispute. Reporters swarmed the hospital entrance, their flashbulbs popping like gunfire, but Eleanor's security team formed a protective wall, guiding Sarah and her mother, Clara, to a waiting limousine. Inside, the leather seats and quiet hum of the engine felt like another planet compared to the crowded buses Sarah was used to, and she sat in silence, her bandaged shoulder aching as she stared at the city blurring past. Clara squeezed her hand, her eyes wide with a mix of pride and disbelief, but Sarah's mind was elsewhere, wrestling with the surreal weight of her new reality. She was no longer just a nurse scraping by, but a public figure, her face on every news channel, her story dissected by strangers online. The condo was breathtaking, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River, hardwood floors gleaming under soft lights, and a kitchen bigger than her old apartment. But it felt like a borrowed life, not hers. That night, alone in the plush bedroom, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the scar beneath her bandage, and made a decision. She wouldn't let this wealth sit idle. She began small wiring funds to clear the medical debts of colleagues at the hospital, nurses and orderlies who'd worked beside her through endless night shifts, their shocked tears over the phone more real to her than the luxury surrounding her. Elena, true to her word, became a quiet presence, visiting with coffee and advice, her CEO Polish softened by a genuine warmth as she shared stories of her own climb from nothing, encouraging Sarah to see the money not as a burden, but a tool. Inspired, Sarah launched a mobile clinic, a van outfitted with medical supplies that parked in Boston's underserved neighborhoods, offering free checkups and mental health support to those who'd never afford it otherwise. The first day, she stood in scrubs beside the van, handing out water bottles and checking vitals, her heart swelling as a young mother thanked her with a trembling hug, saying, "No one's ever cared before." But the spotlight brought challenges. Reporters hounded her, some colleagues whispered she'd sold out, and self-doubt gnawed at her, whispering she didn't deserve this, that she was still the same Sarah who'd once cried in a hospital. Break room over a patient she couldn't save. Elena noticed, pulling her aside one evening in the condo's quiet living room, the city twinkling below. "You're allowed to be more than a nurse now," Elena said, her voice steady but kind. "But you're still you, brave, selfless." "Use that," Sarah nodded, her resolve hardening, and poured herself into her work, expanding the clinic's reach, funding scholarships for nursing students, and renovating a hospital wing for low-income patients, naming it Clara's Haven, after her mother's endless sacrifices. Clara, now living with her in the condo, watched with quiet pride, her days of cleaning houses behind her, though she insisted on cooking Sarah's favorite lasagna to keep things normal. Yet normal was gone. Sarah's inbox overflowed, with thank you letters from strangers, invitations to speak, and even a request from a senator to meet, all of which terrified her as much as they inspired her. She faced pushback too. A few hospital administrators questioned her motives, hinting her sudden wealth made her less relatable, and a tabloid ran a story suggesting she'd known Elena was a CEO, a lie that stung but didn't stop her. Late at night when the city slept, Sarah would stand by her window, the river's reflection calming her racing thoughts, and wonder if she was enough for this new life, if one moment of courage could really carry her this far. Eleanor's mentorship grounded her, their weekly dinners becoming a ritual where they swapped stories. Eleanor's battles in boardrooms, Sarah's triumphs in the clinic, and Sarah began to see herself not as a fluke hero, but as a woman with a purpose. By the end of the month, her mobile clinic had served over 200 people, and she'd paid off $1 million in local medical debt, each cleared bill a victory that felt more real than the headlines. She still woke to nightmares of the gunshot, her scar a constant reminder. But each patient she helped, each nurse whose loans she erased, turned that pain into something else: hope. As she stood in the clinic van one evening, handing a blanket to an elderly man who'd lost his home, she realized she wasn't just surviving her new life. She was shaping it, building something that could outlast her, something that might one day make her dream of a community clinic a reality. Sarah Ellis stood on a London stage at the Global Health Summit, the spotlight warm against her skin, her heart steady despite the sea of faces, doctors, philanthropists, and nurses from across the world, watching her every move. It was 6 months since the shooting, and the sleek conference hall with its glass walls and banners proclaiming healthcare for humanity felt a world away from the Boston cafe where her life had changed. Her navy blazer, tailored yet simple, hid the scar on her chest, but her voice carried a strength that filled the room as she gripped the microphone, her once trembling hands now steady. "I never thought I'd be here," she began, her words clear and deliberate. "Not in front of you, not as anything more than a nurse who clocked in, clocked out, and hoped to make a difference one patient at a time." The audience leaned, captivated as she spoke of her journey. Not the headlines or the hero label, but the quiet moments, the patients who'd taught her resilience, her mother's pride, and the fear she'd felt standing in her new condo, wondering if she could live up to the gift Elena Voss had given her. She didn't mention the money outright, instead focusing on what it had built. The Sarah Ellis Foundation launched that morning with a mission to support frontline healthcare workers with training, mental health resources, and financial aid. Behind her, a screen flickered to life, showing a video of her mobile clinic in Boston. Nurses hugging patients, a ribbon cutting at Clara's Haven, and a new shelter for displaced healthcare workers, its sign reading Ellis Sanctuary. The crowd murmured, some wiping tears, as images flashed of nurses receiving debt forgiveness letters, their faces alight with relief. Sarah paused, her gaze finding Elena in the 5th row, her mentor's black dress understated, but her eyes gleaming with quiet pride. "This isn't about me," Sarah continued, stepping away from the podium, her voice growing bolder. "It's about the people who work 16-hour shifts, who skip meals to hold a patient's hand, who go home to empty fridges but show up again the next day. They're the ones who change the world, and I'm just here to make sure they're seen." Applause erupted, a wave of sound that vibrated through her, but she held up a hand, not done. She spoke of plans for 7 more shelters, partnerships with rural clinics in Africa, and a scholarship program for nurses like she'd been, broke but determined. The screen shifted to the Foundation's logo, a simple stethoscope curved into a heart, and she announced its global expansion, a commitment to reach workers in every corner of the world. The ovation was thunderous, but Sarah's heart was elsewhere, already drifting to the quiet moment she craved. Backstage, she slipped past reporters and well-wishers, waving off her assistant to find solace on a private balcony overlooking London's twinkling skyline. The Thames glittered below, the city's lights a constellation of lives she now felt part of. She leaned against the railing, the cool night air soothing her, the weight of the speech settling into a calm she hadn't known. She could feel. The sliding glass door opened, and Elena stepped out, holding 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea, her smile soft but knowing. "You were incredible," she said, handing Sarah a mug, their fingers brushing in a moment of unspoken connection. Sarah sipped the tea, its warmth grounding her, and asked, "Do you ever think about that day? The cafe, the moment it all changed?" Elena's gaze drifted to the horizon, her voice quiet. "Every day, I hear the shot, see you fall. It reminds me what matters." Sarah nodded, her own memories sharp. The pain, the fear, but also the clarity of why she'd acted. "I used to think it was a fluke, me being there," she said, her voice soft. "But now I think it was meant to lead here." Eleanor turned to her, eyes bright. "You took my gift and made it bigger than I ever could. I gave you money, Sarah, but you gave me purpose. My company's AI, it's shifting now, focusing on healthcare access, because of you." Sarah's throat tightened, the words hitting deeper than the applause. They stood in silence, the city humming below, the distant silhouette of Big Ben a reminder of how far Sarah had come. "Will they remember this in 10 years?" she asked, almost to herself, her voice tinged with doubt. Elena didn't hesitate. "They'll be healing in your clinics, studying on your scholarships, living in your shelters. You're not a moment, Sarah. You're a movement." Sarah laughed, tears prickling, and for the first time, she believed it. The nurse who'd once counted pennies for coffee, who'd patched up her own heart after loss, had become something more, not because of the money or the fame, but because she'd turned one act of courage into a legacy. She looked out at the city, the tea warm in her hands, and whispered, "One choice, one moment, and it's still rippling." Closing her eyes, she let the wind wrap around her, not as the nurse who'd leapt into danger, nor the hero the world saw, but as Sarah. Alice, a woman who'd taken her pain and built a future that would lift others for generations.